Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, hopefully, just speak for not too long, inshallah. So if you just give 10, 20 minutes of your time, inshallah, it will be beneficial. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد أما بعد. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us in a hadith, he says, الدنيا ملعونة وملعون ما فيها إلا ذكر الله وما والاه وعالم ومتعلم. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us that the dunya is cursed and everything in it is cursed, except for dhikrullah, the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wama walah, and things that are associated with the remembrance of Allah, for example worship, etc. And an alim and a muta'allim, a knowledgeable person, a scholar, and a muta'allim, one who learns from the scholars, the students of knowledge. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse of the Quran that إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء, that the ones who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala among the slaves are the ulama, the scholars. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us another hadith that al-ulama warathatul anbiya, that the scholars are the heirs and those who take from the prophets. They're the heirs of the prophets, meaning they're the ones who receive the torch of ilm and knowledge about what? Deen, right? Knowledge of Islam, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge of the seerah, knowledge of sharia. So therefore, it's important for us to learn about the scholars and learn about their lives. Unfortunately, as we can look around, there's not much youth in the masjid. Maybe it's because it's on a Sunday, people are sleeping in, Allah-Ilm. Yeah? But it's important that especially our youth, they learn about the scholars. Yeah? We're in a sad state of affairs. We have what we call as Muslims an identity crisis. Zahir here, he was part of a podcast hosted by Darul, and one of the subjects they talked about was an identity crisis. What is this identity crisis that Muslims are going through? Unfortunately, if you ask the average Muslim youth, 10 years old all the way up to 30 years old, ask them about famous people in Western society, ask them about footballers, ask them about pop stars, ask them about TV personalities. Nowadays, ask them about YouTube stars, ask them about TikTok stars. They'll be able to name you 10 from each category. But then you ask them about, tell me 10 names of the Sahaba. They're going to struggle. Tell me 5 names of scholars, major scholars who've impacted the Muslim world. They're going to be lost for words. Yeah, they're not going to have much to say. So unfortunately, we have this, as a Muslim community, we have this identity crisis. It's very important that Muslims, we learn about our history. Why? Because our history is the basis of our identity. Without knowledge of Islamic history, who are you? Yeah, you're just another person. What makes you different from Bob, Joe on the street? What makes you different from Christians and Jews and etc.? For a Muslim to have pride in himself, have pride in his religion, he needs to have knowledge of his history. Knowledge of Islamic history is very important. Knowledge of figures of Islamic history is very important. Right? That's why learning about the ulama, the great scholars of Islam, is very important. There are 4 main reasons we can summarize why it's very important to learn about the scholars of Islamic history. Number 1, as I mentioned, gives you pride as a Muslim. Yeah, you know why you're a Muslim, you know the good things about Islam, what Islam can produce in personalities and human beings. Right? When I was teaching Maktab a couple of years ago, meaning kids, teaching them Quran and stuff, I asked them who's the most intelligent human being. The answer they gave me was Einstein. So, unfortunately, who is Einstein compared to figures like Imam Bukhari, Imam Tabari, right? So, number one, it gives us pride in our identity, pride in our religion. Number two, the second reason why it is beneficial to learn about Muslim scholars is that it gives us, or it raises our expectations for ourselves, right? Unfortunately, again, people, they come to the masjid 5 times a day, alhamdulillah, pray Fajr, Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib in Jamaat, recite the Quran, maybe 1 hour a day, and they say that's enough. Yeah. In fact, if I told you somebody does that, you'll say, MashaAllah, he's a waliullah, isn't he? Yeah, somebody who comes 5 times a day to the masjid, reads Quran 1 hour, they say, MashaAllah, he's a waliullah. That's how low the bar has dropped, right? That's how low the standard is for Muslims. If you learn about the scholars, we'll see how high the bar is, right? I think it was Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, he would read he'll complete 40 khatams of the Quran in the month of Ramadan. Yeah, I forget which scholar it was, but one of the scholars, he'd complete 40 khatam of the Quran outside of Ramadan and 80 within Ramadan, something along these lines, right? And you had many scholars who completed 1 khatam a day, right? Many scholars. So their whole life, right? One of my ustads, Mullah Yusuf Lorgat, Hafidhullah, he was making the point that we always say we don't have time for things, right? We don't have time to sit to do our adhkar, we don't have time to sit to read Quran, we don't have time for tahajjud, we don't have time for extra nawafil, we don't have time to write about Islam. Let's say if you're somebody who's academic, write Islamic books, etc., etc. We don't have time. He goes, Imam Bukhari, he completed his Sahih al-Bukhari. He would read hours and hours of nawafil and tahajjud at night. He would read Quran, as we mentioned, outside of Ramadan, and in Ramadan so much hours of Quran. And then he produced his books, so many books, Sahih al-Bukhari, his Adab al-Mufrad, yeah, and many other books that he completed, along with traveling, traveling for months on end to go to this scholar and that scholar and learn knowledge and teach knowledge. Who are we when it comes to time? Yeah. So that's another reason why it's important to learn about the lives of scholars. Number two is what? It raises our standards as believers. A third reason is to learn the lives of scholars is they will be more relatable. Yeah, when we think about the Sahaba, we think about the prophets, we think, how can we live up to their standards? Yeah, like the Sahaba, the best generation, the best people after the prophets. The prophets, there's no even point trying to compare yourself to prophets. Sallallahu alayhi ajma'in. But when it comes to scholars of Islamic history, names like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad, Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam al-Nasai, Imam al-Tabari, right? And others, later generation as well. The later generation, Imam al-Suyuti, Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Razi, right? And others. We will be able to relate with them a lot more. Even though they excelled in their religion, excelled in their deen, at least they are more attainable in terms of their piety. Why? Because they don't have the approval of Nabi Sallallahu regarding the Sahaba. Yeah? When Nabi Sallallahu says that the Sahaba, they're destined for Jannah, many of them, for example, the Ashra Mubashara, and those who fought in the Battle of Badr, we think to ourselves, well, of course, they guaranteed Jannah. Yeah, how can we reach that status? But when it comes to the figures like Abu Hanifa, etc., at least there's something more relatable. Yes, they're out there, but at least that's a goal we can achieve. So those are 3 main reasons why it's important to learn about the Islamic scholars. Number 1, gives us pride as Muslims. Number 2, something to relate with. And number 3, I forgot what I mentioned, what number 3 was. But no problem. Yeah. So let's just spend some time just to mention some stories of some of the scholars. Imam Bukhari, very quickly, Imam al-Bukhari, one thing we learn from his life is, I think everyone here is parents, yeah? Well, you parent. Yeah. We learn parenting, good parenting, from the scholars. If you take Imam al-Bukhari as an example, his father was a scholar in his own right. Yeah. I believe he studied under Imam Malik, rahimahullah. However, after Imam Bukhari was born, his father passed away young. Yeah, his father passed away, leaving Imam Bukhari as an orphan. And now he's at the care of who? His mother. And they say that the first madrasa is the home. Right? The first teacher is the mother. Second teacher is maybe the father. Yeah? Unfortunately, Imam Bukhari, he lost his father. So, Imam Bukhari, he was born blind. Or he had an eye disease that eventually made him blind as a child. His mother, rahimahullah, she made excessive dua for him. That, oh Allah, cure my son's blindness. And one night she had a dream that Imam Bukhari, he regained his sight. And lo and behold, he woke up in the morning and she found that Imam Bukhari, he got his eyesight back. This teaches us the power of dua of the parents, especially of the mother. And what's interesting is that Imam al-Bukhari, he would later on write a book called Al-Adab al-Mufrad, in which he writes a collection of ahadith, and the whole compilation of the hadith is about akhlaq, good character. And what's interesting is the first bab that he writes about is birrul walidain, respect for the parents. And the second bab, so in general terms, birrul walidain, he mentions two ahadith that in general terms talks about respecting the parents. And the second chapter in that book, he writes about birrul righteousness to the mother, and then dutifulness to the father. So we learn, even Imam al-Tabari, the scholar, great scholar of tafsir, he wrote the gigantic book which is now known as Tafsir al-Tabari, al-Jami' al-Bayan. And even him, his father had a dream about him, that my son he had a sack of rocks, and he would take out rocks from this sack and he was pelting it and he was standing in front of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in this dream, and he was throwing these stones as if to pelt away evil and harm from Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So when the father woke up, he got the dream interpreted, and the interpreter of the dream said, Tabari, later in life, he will work to defend Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he will be a scholar of deen. And so, Imam Tabari's father and Imam Tabari's mother, they dedicated themselves to building a scholar out of Imam Tabari. At the age of 7, he became a hafiz of the Quran. At the age of 8, he began leading the salah. Right? Imagine that, a little 8-year-old boy leading salah. At the age of 9, they started him in hadith studies. Right? Imam Bukhari as well, the same story. Imam Bukhari, by the age of 11, he had a ustad in Bukhara, where he was born, in Uzbekistan, modern day Uzbekistan. Imam Bukhari, at the age of 11, his ustad, Imam al-Dakhili, that he was reciting hadith and he made a mistake. Imam Bukhari said, Ya Shaykh, you made a mistake. The Shaykh said, he looked through his work, his hadith, and he said, okay, yeah, I made a mistake. But then he thought, let me test young Bukhari. Does he know the correct hadith? Okay, he pointed out my mistake, but can he recite the sanad with the matan? Right? The chain of narration as well as the hadith itself. So yeah, he quizzed him. He said, okay, what is the correct hadith? Imam al-Bukhari, he mentioned the correct hadith. And when he heard this young 11-year-old boy is correcting me, not only correcting me, he's telling me the whole sanad and the hadith and everything. He said, by Allah, this child is going to have status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where does this come from? Well, this comes from parenting. This comes from, the efforts of the parents. This comes from the fikr of the parents. It's in the mind of the parent that I want the best for my child, not only in dunya, right? In fact, dunya is secondary. I want the best for my child in akhirah. So that's a main thing. In fact, throughout many of the scholars, if you look at, pick 100 scholars, 90% of them will have strong parents behind them. Parents who pushed them towards ilm. Parents who supported them from a young age. Parents who put that in them, right? And so much so that even in adulthood they would dedicate their lives to hadith studies, or Quran studies, or fiqh studies, or whatever it might be, right? So inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq, as parents, inshallah, to give our children the opportunity to learn. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the fikr for our children. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala safeguard our youth and give them knowledge of Islam, and in that way build pride within them as Muslims, right? And pride for the scholars and the Anbiya and the Sahaba and all of them. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا عن دينك يا رب العالمين. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. رب زدنا علما. ربنا تقبل منا انك انت السميع العليم وتب علينا انك انت التواب الرحيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين. جزاك الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.